Okay, so now we'll start talking a little bit about the text. So you had a little bit of time before this interview to take a look at it. And I asked you to read an article on place, encountering geography and philosophy by Tim Cresswell. And I wondered if I could start by asking you to summarise what you thought of that article.
So I think place is a concept that we use a lot in our own language, but the text tried to kind of broaden your understanding of what place can mean, especially in a specifically geographical context, and the histories that make place, but also our understanding of the concept of place. So place is both like a physical space or somewhere you can visit or something you can see, but also the other side of place is something you might understand, or your impression of something or somewhere, and how that notion of place, whether that's your own notion or what someone else has made you come to think, how that's been formed, and how that changes over time, between people, and kind of why that might be, and just getting you to see other ways of what it can mean.
I mean, that's really interesting, isn't it? And you've sort of anticipated what my next question is going to be, insofar as there's an interesting definition of place that's talked about in this article. What do you think that definition of place is, and do you feel it's a good definition of place?
I think it boils down to, I think I read one of the sentences said, a place with meaning, and that's come to change over time as well. With I think now it said, now we understand that as experience and how people experience a place. So changing from somewhere that is just possibly just a physical space, or somewhere defined by, say, for example, natural features, or a building that's there, to something deeper, or what it has been before and why that's changed, why that's different. So yeah, a meaning, and how that meaning's been created, and also the different meanings people have of a place and why that is.
And that's great. I mean, what do you think this focus on meaning adds to our study of human geography? Is this a valuable addition to the field, do you think?
Yeah, I think it allows different perspectives to be not just acknowledged but understood. And it also kind of illuminates the perspectives that were never allowed to be exposed in the past. So those insights have possibly always been there, but weren't able to be shown, or weren't allowed to be shared in the past. So I like the bit in the paper where it described about how human geography can show Marxist perspectives or feminist perspectives, and they all have, they all shed different lights on the same place, how different people have come to view it.
I'm really pleased you sort of pulled that out of the article, because it's really interesting, that different sense of sort of ways in which we view place is expressed. How do you think we do that as geographers? How do we sort of, as from a kind of a methodological perspective, incorporate this idea of meaning or experience or power within our understanding of place? How would we go about doing it?
I think looking at the past is always a useful start, and then comparing it to today, the present, and possibly where it can go in the future as well. So that temporal aspect, I think, is always useful in geography, because there's always space changes all the time, and that's affected by humans and nature. So I think time plays a massive part. So I think starting historically or through time is always a good start. But also, I think the new focus on experiences is really interesting in human geography, and that opens up a lot of kind of methods of exploration, because obviously things like experiences are really subjective. And that's really useful, but also might find some challenges from a methodological perspective. But I think human geography is a way of exploring all of that.
And I think your focus on time is an interesting one. And yeah, I think you're absolutely right to highlight some methodological challenges that might come up as a part of that. Might come back to that if we have time in a second, but I wanted to sort of take this idea of place to the end point of the article, where Cresswell asks us to think about, I suppose, whether places can be virtual, and whether they need to be rooted in a physical location. What do you think about that?
I think it's really interesting, because even I like how he kind of acknowledges how even virtual space has moved from one computer screen to something you can take with you everywhere. So even virtual spaces are now transcendent of physical spaces. You can be, on the top of a mountain, but also be connected to places all around the world, whether virtual or physical. And I think that's within technological space and place. I think that's another interesting side of it. But because everyone, I think it's something that we've just come to accept, but you're connected to so many places through the internet. He also mentions how we're still rooted to like locations and mapping through in ways we don't realize. Like we always have our GPS on, or our locations being tracked. You can find things like find my iPhone, find my family. You can track where other people are in a way where you don't have to be in the same physical space. So it really broadens our idea of what we think place is, and it transcends anything physical. And I think within geography that's really interesting from an academic point of view, because before geography was all about maps and I am here, but you can physically be in a space, but in a meeting with people in a meeting from the other side of the world. So I think it's changed in a lot of interesting aspects.
That's fantastic. I mean, I just have one last question for you. And Cresswell talks through 3 examples, doesn't he, about different ways in which different places, different sort of ways in which you can use this idea of place to look at places, if you will. I wondered if you had a place that you could think of, that you could maybe talk through how you as a geographer could interpret its construction as a place, and just give us a sort of a few highlights of how that might work.
In the text, he talked about, I think it was a monument. So with the Angel of the South or something.
Yes.
And I think monuments are I think for everyone, a good visual representation of a place. But for me, along the same kind of lines, I would choose St. Peter's Square in Manchester.
Oh yes.
Where a couple of years ago, they built a statue of Emmeline Pankhurst. And I thought that was really symbolic of what the city how the city wants to express itself, and how that's changed. So Emmeline Pankhurst, I believe I believe she was born in Manchester, or she did a lot of work in Manchester. A lot of her suffragette work was in Manchester. And that history was always there, but it's only now that it's being, you know, proudly expressed and shared, and everyone really wants to celebrate her and what she stood for. And I think that shows a nice shift in culturally what the city, how the city wants to view themselves and how they want other people to view them, but also what we think is important to us. Because I read a book called Invisible Women, and in it explained how there's more statues of men called John than there are of women in the whole country, except from Queen Victoria. So you just think, you know, this one statue of a woman is shouldn't be as significant as it is, but it marks a really significant cultural shift, I think, in who we celebrate and why. So that's one of the places I would pick, I think.
That's wonderful. I mean, I wish we could spend longer on this, but I think we're probably out of time. So thank you so much.